Hey everyone, this is going to be Trig day 1. So we're moving on from logs into Trig, and most of this is going to be review for you guys. We're going to start super simple, and then we're going to get a little bit harder. So most of the stuff for this week should be review for you. So what we're going to do first is we're going to set up our trig ratios for sine, cosine, and tangent. And if you remember the little mnemonic that they have for remembering your trig ratios is SOHCAHTOA. So SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. So remember, each ratio is a fraction. So for sine, you're having your opposite side over your hypotenuse. For cosine, it's your adjacent side over your hypotenuse. And then for tangent, it's the opposite side over the adjacent side. So for question number 1, here's our triangle. We have all 3 sides, so we don't need to find any information there. We're just writing what our ratio is, what our fraction is. So the first thing you want to do is you want to label your sides. So we always go on the basis of our angle, which is right here. This is a theta. It's a way that we represent an angle instead of using an x is we use a theta. So I have my angle here. So my opposite side is going to be the one that's across from the angle. So it's going to be this 3 here is my opposite side. This 4 is right next to it. So that's going to be my adjacent side. And then my hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. It's the longest side. So 5 is my hypotenuse. Okay, so once I have my sides all labeled, finding your ratios should be super simple. You just have to figure out, okay, which number is on the top of the fraction, which number is on the bottom. So for sine, we said that sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So my opposite is 3, so that's on top, divided by, and my hypotenuse is 5. So sine of theta is just 3 over 5. Then for cosine, we're using these same numbers again, but cosine's asking me for adjacent over hypotenuse. So the 4 is my adjacent side, and the hypotenuse is 5. So there's my ratio for cosine. For tangent, I am using the opposite side over the adjacent side. So this one's going to be 3 divided by 4. And that's all we're doing for these is we just need to figure out what is my sine, cosine, and tangent ratio. So moving on to question number 2, you can see that we're missing a side here. So in order for me to find that, I have to use Pythagorean theorem, which is just our a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, and remember a and b are the 2 legs of the triangle, and then c is always your hypotenuse. The order of a and b doesn't matter at all, but C always has to be the hypotenuse. So right now we're finding the hypotenuse because this is my angle. So if you want to, you can label your triangle even before you find that 3rd side. So with our adjacent, opposite, and our hypotenuse. So here's my angle. The 8 is adjacent because it's right next to it. The 15 is my opposite because it's across from it. And then the x is my hypotenuse because it's the one that's across from the right angle. It's the longest side. So now I'm just plugging in my numbers and I'm finding my C value. So I have to plug in 8 and 15. And I'm trying to find C squared, which is just my X. Okay, so we're just plugging this into our calculator. You can do it in multiple steps. You can solve it all at once. It does not matter. So I've got 8 squared is 64. 15 squared is 225. And that's equal to C squared. I add those together, and I get 289 equals C squared. And since this is squared, to solve for it, I have to take a square root. And remember, when you take a square root, you get both a positive and a negative number. But since we're talking about a side length here, we only want the positive. So the square root of 289 gives you 17. So my side over here is 17. And then I do the exact same thing that I did before with finding sine, cosine, and tangent. So my sine of theta is my opposite over hypotenuse. So from here, my opposite is 15. My hypotenuse is 17. Cosine, I'm looking for adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's 8 over 17. And then for tangent, I'm looking for opposite over adjacent, which is 15 over 8. Okay, so first you just need to find that side that's missing, and then you're just setting up your fractions, your ratios, using SOHCAHTOA. Okay, last one that we're going to do for today. And for most of these questions, there's not really much that I can give you guys that's different, except for numbers. So the only thing that you're going to have that's different for these questions is figuring out how to find that third side or just the numbers that I'm giving you. So I'm going to say the angle is over here. Okay, so I have my angle. I need to label my sides first. So 25 is my hypotenuse because it's the one that's across from that right angle. It's my longest side. X is going to be my adjacent side because it's the one that's right next to the angle. And then 15 is going to be my opposite side because it's across. So since I'm missing a side, again, I'm going to have to do Pythagorean theorem. So I've got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So for this question, it's a little different than number 2 because we're not solving for the hypotenuse here. We're solving for one of the sides. So I'm going to say x squared plus 15 squared equals 25 squared. So you have to pay attention to what you're trying to find and what you have. So if I have a hypotenuse, then I need to plug it in for the c value. If I'm trying to find the hypotenuse, then I'm leaving the c value as a c or as an x. So we need to pay attention to that. So I'm going to figure out what my squares are for each one. So I've got x squared plus 225 equals 625. For this, I'm trying to solve for x, so I need to get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 225. So this one's a little more difficult, but it's just regular solving. So for that, I get 400. I'm going to take a square root of both, and then the square root of 400 just gives me 20. So I've got x equals 20, and I'll plug that in up here. Okay, so now that I have all of my sides of my triangle, I'm just going to fill in my ratios. So sine of theta is my opposite side over my hypotenuse, so that's going to be 15 over 25. For cosine, I have my adjacent over hypotenuse, which is 20 over 25. And then for tangent, my opposite over adjacent, which is 15 over 20. Okay, so again, you just have to remember the ratios there. So sine is always your opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and then tangent is opposite over adjacent. So for those, we just have to remember what they are. And then we're just filling in the ratios. And if you have to find a sine or find a side, you have to use Pythagorean theorem first. Okay, so make sure you check out your homework for day 1.